All right, here we are. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. If this is your first time listening to the show today, let me welcome you. Everyone else, what's up? How was your week? Sure went by fast, didn't it? I think we are in a full-on time warp these days. And I don't know about anyone else, but I am still sitting with all of the same difficult and unanswered questions that I was talking about last week. Sitting here now, they all continue to remain unanswered and difficult. Seems to me that for many of us, there is a dawning and stark recognition that this is it, that this is as much as we're going to see of a comeback in the yoga world. I remember when we were in lockdown and I was discussing on the show about how we weren't going to go back to doing what we were before the pandemic, that there was no way to go back to what it was before. We all sort of intuitively knew that this was going to be like a new normal. But I think somewhere inside of me, I still was having hope that there was going to be some amount more than we've seen of a resurgence, that it was going to come back more than it has. And honestly, if you're someone who wasn't making your living teaching yoga classes, or if you were just someone right now even who, I imagine a lot of you are still going to classes at your local center. So if you're still going to classes every week and there's people in class, maybe it's 10, 15 instead of 30 or 40 like the old days, but still there's plenty of people in class. Everything seems pretty normal. What are you talking about, Jay? Still lots of yoga centers, lots of yoga classes. And I could totally see how from many people's vantage points that would be the case. However, if you're someone like me who had gotten to a certain place sort of career-wise before the pandemic, or you had a different vantage point where it wasn't just noticing your local centers, but you were even traveling internationally and kind of observing what was happening in different yoga communities around the world, there was a whole ecosystem. There was independent yoga centers around the world. There were yoga center chains that were venture capitalist backed. There were yoga celebrities who had endorsement deals from big companies like Nike and Adidas. And then there were like independent rogues like me who started out writing a blog and then started a podcast. I was like Christian Slater in that movie. What was it? Pump Up the Volume with my pirate radio station, essentially. But I was broadcasting out into this whole ecosystem of what I was calling the yoga world. And simply putting out my blog or this podcast and putting out stuff that people found interesting or engaging and were connecting with equaled just invitations, people reaching out to me like, hey, do you want to come here and teach? Hey, do you want to come here? There was like all kinds of things that were just baked into what I was called the yoga world. And I was, kind of navigating my way through it as like a B-lister or whatever I was. And it felt like I had a direction sort of career-wise. Like you could see models of people who were doing things successfully and offering different products and whatnot. And it just seemed like there was a lot of possibility for yoga teachers to make their livings and be creative. And it feels scary and hard to admit it, but it's official. That yoga world, that ecosystem that I came up in, it's gone. It's gone. We can't kid ourselves about it. And I know this to be true because at this point, I've talked to enough people who would know and they're all reporting the same thing to me. They're all seeing it and everybody's in a same kind of state of limbo or ambiguity that I don't think yoga teachers were facing before. And that is what I will be discussing today with my guest, Noah Mazé. Noah has been here before, back in 2017. We discuss it. And he's a perfect example of someone who saw the way that things were evolving and developing in industry, who managed to navigate his way. He had way better deals than me. He was way more of an A-lister than me, I think. And he recently did a year-end check-in in the same way that I did here on the show. If you want to go back and listen to it at the end of December, I did a solo episode where I talked about some of this stuff that I was thinking about. Well, Noah did the same thing, and a listener of this show sent me the email that he sent out to his list. And he did a similar thing that I did, and he was transparent and honest about the situation in a way that I am also trying to be. So I reached out to him, and I was very happy that he agreed to go there with me and to share some of what he's seen and to commune a little bit on the current moment. So very glad to have had this conversation with Noah, and it's my pleasure to be sharing it with you today. Real quick before we get to that, let me mention that even though the yoga world has been decimated and it no longer feels like there's any clear avenues, there's still stuff happening. I'm not saying there's not stuff happening. I'm still doing stuff. I've got some upcoming in-person events. I'm going to be in Austin, Texas, May 4th and 5th. I'm going to be at the Berkshire Yoga Festival in June 8th and 9th, I think it is. I also got plenty of other stuff online if you want to take some live classes with me, if you want to be part of a weekly discussion group. Maybe you want to take advantage of my new on-demand video course. There's lots of ways for us to connect outside of just listening to this show. If you're interested in that, all you need to do is go to jbrownyoga.com. Okay. I think that's it. I will touch base with you on the other side, but let's go ahead and listen to this conversation that I had with Noah Mazé. There we go.
There we go.
Hi, Noah. Now I can hear you. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you just fine now. Yes.
All right. There we go. We made it. Good to speak with you once again. It's been a minute since we last spoke.
Yes, it has been.
And I don't know how familiar you are with the show these days. I am already recording, so please, let's just consider ourselves having just begun, if that's okay.
Fantastic. Yes.
Cool. Well, I just looked it up. It was September of 2017.
Okay.
Which was the only other time we've spoken here on this show. And I mean, it seems like another lifetime ago. It's crazy.
It does. I'm glad you looked it up because I was trying to remember and I was, I don't know if my memory is I don't know what's happening with memory, right? But just trying to think back to that many years ago, kind of pre-pandemic and go I don't have a real crisp memory of linear time, exactly when that was,
I know. Time has definitely warped on us over the last few years, it seems. I remembered, I did take a quick gander through it. We did your bio stuff and the whole Anya Sara thing. And then there was Facebook drama happening back then. It just seems like such a, like I said, we're living in a completely new world now, it seems to me,
It does seem that way.
And, what brings us together, just for anybody listening to this, and anybody listens to the show, heard it at the end of last year, I did, I have a ritual of a year-end check-in. And normally I don't do episodes that are just me solo. I always have had a guest since I've been doing this 8 years. But 3 or 4 times in the last 2 years, I've done like a solo episode where I expand upon sometimes the things that I talk about in the intro and do just like a one-to-one check-in. And this year I did one, and it was just reflecting in much the same way that you did in your email, which was entitled Goodbye 2023, Hello 2024, which someone sent me because we were kind of singing a same song. And it was a very kind of vulnerable and difficult song to sing as well, because it's about a certain transparency about like the business side, or like not even just the business side, or like the actuality of being a yoga teacher. And, you know, I started this show in 2016, not that much longer before we talked. And one of the big motivating factors for me was wanting to kind of strip like away the Instagramification where all you saw were like yoga teachers like in these exotic locations on their retreats having these amazing yoga every damn day lives or whatever. But there was a grind to it, and there was like, I had all kinds of physical pain I was into that yoga teachers weren't always admitting to. I knew other yoga teachers who had pain. And then like, you know, so part of the show was always about kind of doing that. And you did that in your email, and I really appreciate it because the things that you were saying were really what I was experiencing too. And I brought you here so that we might be able to commune and like, I don't know, see if we can find some inspirations going forward. So thank you so much for making this time in your life to come speak with me today.
Absolutely. I'm happy we're back in this conversation, and that it's been a minute. And I very much appreciated your that end of year solo podcast for your own honesty and vulnerability and transparency with what, you know, I might term for myself as well, a sense of ambiguity, like a sense of like, you know, not having a clear direction or inspiration, you know, call to action that, you know, I can look back at my teaching over the years and over the decades of feeling like I really had like purpose, right? Kind of purpose and meaning. And that, you know, I'm in this current phase of feeling less purpose and less meaning, and you know, kind of coming into relationship with that, right? That like,
well, you know, let's go back a little bit though, because I understand what you mean by purpose. I mean, well, we got to flesh out what we mean by the lacking of purpose and meaning, because there's all kinds of purpose and meaning we derive from yoga. But what I want to say is that there is kind of a dilemma that we have, and you reference it in your email when you talk about kind of normally wanting to come to your email with like an intention of bringing inspiration and wisdom and wanting to create a space where we're pointing in the directions we want to go. We're not like talking about how fucked up everything is, you know what I mean? So I have like a co-producer business partner friend who over the years he's always like, oh, it's such a terrible idea. Why do you have to go so far and like share numbers or whatever, like I've done over the years. And I just, for myself, I felt like I needed to, because there is this weird mix of, on one hand, you are making a living at it, and you have a family, and I have a family, and we've been doing it for so long at this point. I've been like imagining, much like I got a sentiment in you, like for the first time as long as I could remember, well, do I keep doing this? Like even contemplating the idea of what it would be like, oh, maybe I don't need to be a yoga teacher and teaching classes and doing this podcast. Like, I think I would still be okay as a person inside all this yoga, right? I think, am I clinging?
Yeah.
to a certain thing. So that's you know what I mean? And when you're marketing something or when you're promoting something, you're not usually leading with your blemishes, you know?
Right. Or your ambiguity or your uncertainty. It's like, here, this is going to change your life. You know, this is going to help you.
Transform with me into everything being screwed up or whatever, you know?
Yeah.
But I think it's important because, like I said, one of the reasons I started this show, because there's a lot of yoga teachers who listen to this, is to be honest, because we're not the only people. That's the thing. That's what I got from your emails. Like, I'm really not alone. It's not just me, because there's big shifts that have happened in the yoga world. So that's kind of what I want. I want to talk some shop about the shifts in the yoga world with you, because I think you've seen it from a similar but different vantage point than mine. And I want to know that I'm not crazy. So last time we talked was in 2017. And I know that's hard to remember, but do you have a sense of, like, what did your gig look like at that time? Like, did you have regular classes at a center? Did you own a center? I don't think you had a center. Did you have like a home-based center? Were you traveling a lot? Because that's what I was doing. I let the center go in 2017. I was traveling internationally until February 2020 when the world shut down. So I want to go back there and get a sense, like 2017, pre-pandemic, if we can remember, what did your kind of professional life look like?
It sounds pretty similar to yours in that, you know, we had a small studio in LA in 2013, 2014, and then we outgrew that, certainly for like a number of events per year, and we committed to a much bigger space that then quickly became kind of unsustainable, in part because I was still traveling quite a bit. Like you can't like anchor a home base studio and be gone 50% of the time. So we try to like span that, and that probably, you know, took us into that 2017 period, at which point we let go of our yoga center and kind of happily found a great collaboration partnership with Wanderlust Hollywood. And kind of moved the school into Wanderlust Hollywood as a home base here in Los Angeles, while of course I continued to travel, you know, for those years up until that same time period when it all stopped. You know, and then kind of in the pandemic era, of course, many of those local studios, Wanderlust Hollywood included, couldn't stay viable. Closed their doors. And it's just such a different landscape now, just physically, geographically, brick and mortar spaces, much less really those physical spaces that were those focal points and anchors for community to gather and to do yoga, right? To share yoga together. That has kind of just dispersed.
Yeah, I would say that even before the pandemic, there was some writing on the wall. Like the reason why, I mean, yours was maybe a little bit different situation because I wasn't traveling while I had my center. I didn't start doing the travel until later on, like the last few years of the center, when I had a really good group of teachers and I actually could go away for a week or two and it was fine.
Yeah.
But I think that it was like a race against the rents, you know, to like find a space somewhere where there was like foot traffic and people walking around who would come to a yoga class at 2 p.m. on Wednesday.
Right.
And there were neighborhoods like Williamsburg, Brooklyn was that when I got my place in 2007. So if you had a place like that, I talk about this. I literally got a lease at a storefront place on Metropolitan and Lorimer in Williamsburg before everybody moved there. And the rent was pretty reasonable. I put an A-frame sign out front and 100+ new people walked in the door every day. Wow. And like you said, we just did the ding. We just taught classes and we had like a community and people got married, you know, all the stuff.
Yep.
But at a certain point, I remember the 5-year lease comes up and it in New York, the way it works, there's a built-in little increase each year. That's part of the lease. Very small though, reasonable. But then the new lease renewal always would bump up like 30%.
Yeah.
And it was a struggle. And then how was all the centers meeting that was teacher training, because you could charge thousands of dollars instead of hundreds of dollars. And then teacher trainings always wanted guest teachers, right? So there is a circuit of people who are taking in thousands of dollars for teacher training and like, I love Noah Mazé. Noah, will you come teach a workshop?
Right.
Right?
Yep. Absolutely.
So those gigs that you were doing, the traveling you were doing, do you remember like how those gigs came about? Did people just reach out to you, or did you go out and like solicit gigs? Because I don't remember trying to find gigs. I just remember lots of invitations.
Yeah, lots of invitations, and that it really was for me a continuation of Anusara community in many ways. That I was an Anusara yoga certified licensed teacher from 2002 or 2003, or maybe even earlier than that, up into 2012, and that that community, the Anusara community, was very plugged into larger concentric rings of community. So there was a guest teacher kind of culture in Anusara yoga, not just with teacher trainings, but just for weekend workshops, immersions, and so on. So that was really a continuation for me, with kind of intersecting other aspects of yoga community, the conferences, like back when Yoga Journal was doing conferences.
Did you do Yoga Journal conferences, like what, the basements at the Marriott or whatever?
The basement, yeah. I taught
before Wanderlust.
In many a conference room before Wanderlust. Yeah, before Wanderlust was the kind of years of Yoga Journal conferences, and their, what I think was their kind of main conference in Estes Park, Colorado, in, I think it was like September, was the kind of annual time. But, and then they, then they expanded, became kind of more Yoga Journal conferences in different locations throughout the US. And
funny you say that. Sorry to interrupt you, but I remember when I talked to Jason Crandall, he told me that his first was on a cruise ship, that Yoga Journal did a cruise ship one time.
I don't even remember that. That's funny.
Yeah, it was like a disco floor. He was like on a disco floor.
Right.
But what I want to ask you about my curiosity about the conferences as opposed to Wanderlust, it was my impression, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, because I never did a Yoga Journal conference. I think I might have gone to one, but I always remember them being like way more like kind of educational.
Yep.
Like
people
more
wanted
to learn from that teacher that they
wanted
didn't
to learn.
live.
Yeah.
As opposed to Wanderlust, which was much more of a party vibe, right?
Yeah. But more entertainment, more, music festival and yoga festival. Like it was a festival, not so much a conference.
Yeah.
And so even just the, that kind of branding, Yoga Journal conference, is and was a more educational, certainly my experience, in that the sessions during the main part of the conference were 2 hours. 2 hours is a solid block of time. That's a workshop time. And that, folks would come, a lot of yoga teachers, of course, but just dedicated, students of yoga, they would come because in one place they could sample all of these different teachers and to some degree, I think people were shopping, right? Of like, well, I want to kind of try out these teachers and see if which ones really speak to me, which one really resonates. There weren't really many opportunities to get
No internet. There was no internet stuff.
Right. No internet for the cost of, one ticket to be able to go and experience, 10, 12, 15 different teachers
Richard
from
Freeman
around the world.
and Shiva Ray all in the same weekend,
Yeah. All in the same weekend. and yeah, it was more educational. But it kind of planted the seeds for, I think, what, that next wave of things like Wanderlust festivals, yoga and music festivals, which the classes during the main part of the conference were 90 minutes, not 2 hours. And so that they could have, there's just that many more class slots in a day if you got a 90-minute duration. And so every 2 hours was, a block of, your next activity.
Same thing happened with classes at the centers. I remember when I first went to Jiva back in the early 90s, they were all an hour and 45 minutes long. And teachers would make us do 15-minute shavasanas and they would time them. And after 5 minutes, everybody would get squeamy, but they'd make you stay. And then they made them 90 minutes. And then eventually they made them mostly 60 minutes back,
Yes. It's not too many years ago where 90 minutes was more the industry standard for yoga class. Like class was just 90 minutes. And it's been a number of years where 90 minutes is kind of the outlier. Now I've heard folks refer to 90 minutes as a workshop. Like, oh, that's a workshop.
I know, to me, I still think 2.5, 3 hours is a workshop.
Yeah.
But I will say I got over it. I resisted it initially. Like I fought it. I was like, you can't do a real class. But then eventually I thought, well, the truth is I accepted that there wasn't as much yoga education in these classes, that they were practices that you were doing with people. And I can do a 10-minute practice. So if I can do a 10-minute practice, then I could do a 60-minute class, I had to change my mind around it, to stop fighting, to let go of the old ways. But it was a change. That's all I'm pointing to, that there was a shift, and it happened. You could see in the way that the gatherings happened, whether it was the conferences being long sessions and very educational because people really wanted to learn, to Wanderlust, which there was no way that the conferences could compete with exotic fun vacations where you get to smoke weed and also practice. You know what I mean? Like there was...
and good, music headliners that are interesting, and also like substantive programming.
Still really cool yoga teachers doing really cool stuff.
Really cool yoga teachers, and usually on the Thursday, they had like half day, immersion kind of thing. So for the real committed, for the folks that wanted more of an education, they would sign up for that 3 hour or all day long Thursday immersion.
Right. Yes. In fact, I'll mention it now, but it's a precursor, but I'm sure you know Andrew Tanner.
Yep.
Andrew put together this Berkshire Yoga Festival where they're trying to bring back a Wanderlust kind of thing.
Right.
And I signed on board. He reached out. I was like, count me in. There's just not much going on right now. And in the past, I might have been like, do I really want to do festivals or whatever? And now I'm like, sure, I'll do a festival.
A place where folks are gathering for yoga. Sounds like the answer to a dream at this point. Right. I remember kind of back in it's kind of my Anusara, elitism phase, I might call it, where thinking like, oh, those festivals, remember kind of looking down my nose at them, that it wasn't serious. It wasn't the serious yoga for the serious yogis. It was the kind of party yoga.
I still think that's true, but I'm also okay with maybe some party yoga. I guess, I don't think they have to be mutually exclusive of one another.
Yeah, and that's what I've come to.
I'm also curious about it because it has been so long. I have done larger venues like that, like at Omega or Kripalu, where you have a real big room. And so there's a different feel to that. But I'm just kind of, again, curious to see who shows up and what it's like now in 2024. But the other thing I was thinking about in terms of precursors to the pandemic, if I remember, and I think I read that you wrote this, that you were involved at Yogaglo. Isn't that right?
Yep. Yogaglo.
And some people listening to this might not even know what Yogaglo is. Can you imagine? I remember writing a blog post called "Is Yogaglo Evil?" And the reason was because were trying to patent a camera angle or something.
Yep.
There was this big uproar, like we weren't going to be able to make our yoga videos the way we wanted because Yogaglo was going to get a patent on a camera angle. So tell me about how you got involved, or I think you were involved from the beginning. So what was your relationship to Yogaglo?
I was involved really from the beginning, and the founder of Yogaglo, he came to my class in 2007, 2008. He came to my class and approached me, asked for a meeting, came over to my house and sat with me and my wife Tracy, and gave us the pitch, right? Gave us the vision, which included the camera angle and the look of the room, and having a camera in the back of the room
with like two rows, so you were kind of like in the class, kind of.
Yeah, that you're in the class, and that there's the camera's inside of a box, so it's more or less invisible. Like it doesn't, you're not feeling like you're walking into a production studio. You feel like you're walking into a yoga studio. That they wanted it to feel like, the online user's experience to feel like you're putting a mat down and you're part of a class and you're looking through rows of students to where the teacher mat is, to where the teacher's teaching, and that it was going to be all very neutral, very white wall, not full of stuff. Mm-hmm. And that they were going to keep the price point, right? There was kind of a price point, like a monthly membership price point, which I think was like $18 a month, which, was and still is kind of the cost of like a drop-in class, or maybe it's less than a single drop-in class in a lot of places at this point.
It should be said, subscription service online yoga classes were unheard of at that time.
Unheard of.
So it's a given, but back then, nobody had ever really even heard of such a thing.
This was new. Yeah. Back then it was still DVDs, right? Back then it was still like, I was kind of waffling of like, well, do I produce a yoga DVD? Like so many
Rodney
of my
Yee
friends
had all the DVDs,
in college, right? And that I practiced with. Like I had Richard Freeman's DVDs and VHS cassettes before that.
The VHS,
So we were kind of still in that disc media, right? Which to me doesn't seem very different than say publishing a book. Like it's a physical thing that you have, right? That like it marks a time and a place and space. And it still felt like that with Yogaglo
because it wasn't like live Zoom meetings. You would go in and do the class and it'd be filmed and then it was there. It was on demand.
It was there on demand in the archive. And the filming location in Los Angeles, it was simply a time slot for folks to come and do yoga. So you would get regular people coming to do yoga, like at a yoga studio, at an advertised time. And that was, it was just teaching a weekly class or a couple of weekly classes at this location that were, oh, by the way, also being filmed. So it took a little bit of that mental gymnastics as a teacher to wrap your head around teaching people in the room, but there's a camera, it's being filmed. And so, how that affects your presentation, and that you don't want to overly date stamp your class talking about the weather today, because the weather today is not what people are going to experience.
You're looking for something more evergreen, right?
More evergreen, right? Yeah. So the evergreen, the shelf life, and all of these things. Which fast forward years later, like we've all been teaching so much online, like it's
second nature. You don't even think about
second nature. Yeah. Like that's just basic information. But back then, this was new. This was a new paradigm. And there were these emergent companies on the marketplace. Yogaglo was one of them. Yoga International came out with its production, video on demand kind of things. And then, many others.
You worked for them too, right? You did some stuff with them too, right?
Yeah, I did some stuff with them too. So I had my kind of Yogaglo phase that was some years. And then I had a Yoga International phase for some years.
Well, let me ask you a insider question. And I guess it's enough in the rear view mirror that we can talk candidly, but don't say anything that you don't feel comfortable saying, of course.
Of course.
I'm curious about like what the what the money deal was with Yogaglo, because it was my impression that like folks like yourself, where the founder guy came to your class and came to your house and made the pitch, might have gotten different deals than people got down the road. And that like once there was like a certain number of teachers, like the same thing happened with like music. And my friend is a composer and Spotify, and like the kind of the model, which has changed. Now we all independently produce all our own shit now, most of us. But back then, that model of the big pool of all these big teachers and then everybody paying $18 a month, like your cut. I talked to Elena Brower about this. She was like my third guest ever on the show. I cringe at it now because I was so bad at it back then. But like, I remember her, she got a sweet deal because she was there from the beginning. So I'm curious, what was the situation like? And did at some point it grow sour, or why did you go to internet? Why didn't you continue to work with them?
It did at some point grow sour, which was difficult and painful. It was, the startup vision of Yogaglo was very inspiring from like I could wrap my head around it as a teacher. Like I'm going to teach class. They wanted me to teach how I teach, but obviously make it evergreen. Like there's a camera recording this, so don't get overly specific in terms of time and place. But that they wanted me to be me. They wanted the diversity of content and the authenticity of teachers and teaching. They wanted the experience. They wanted to try to capture and offer online the very real experience of coming, gathering, teaching class, taking class. Financially, it was the of the subscriber fee, a portion of that went to the teacher pool that was designated for the teacher pool. And then that was shared among the teachers based on your percentage of the total portfolio, right? So,
you got a bigger cut if more people were watching your video.
No, you got a bigger cut if you had more filmed, right? If you had more content.
Oh, so it didn't matter. So if everybody was coming for you, somebody else who wasn't getting as much views. It didn't matter.
Yeah. So one of the things that I really liked about their initial vision is that it wasn't a collective
vibe. That's like we're all in this
together. It wasn't a popularity contest. It wasn't just about like, well, what kind of yoga gets viewed the most, and let's just do what's popular, right? Yeah. Let's just do what's popular. They didn't want it to be that. They wanted to level that kind of playing ground and go, well, do philosophy lectures get watched less than exciting vinyasa? Probably, right? Probably. But they didn't want it to be that popularity contest, and they didn't, their initial, I don't know how they're doing it now, but their initial model for compensation wasn't based on how many people are watching you. Mm. It was based on, how many minutes film do you have and what percentage of the total content pool does that represent? And that's your piece of the pie.
Yeah. You know what the really big problem is? Even if everybody was happy with their cut, the problem is, as you said, they wanted the authentic experience of what you're doing as a teacher. But that is essentially like your intellect. That's the only thing that you have, like all your years.
Right.
Of practice,
and then the ownership
and developing your voice as a teacher. And anybody who's been at it for a while now knows, hopefully has come to understand that whoever produces the video usually owns the video.
Yeah, whoever's pushing record
if they put up all the money and fly you in, that means they own the video. And so all this work you've done all these years so that you can show up on that day for your big shoot and execute what you've developed as a teacher now gets to be owned by someone else. And that's why I have my partner, Josh, because at that pivotal moment where people were coming to me and wanting me to do that, he was a friend of mine and a student of mine, and he had been a composer and seen it in the music world happen. And he like made me not do it. He's like, we're making it. You and me are making it, I'll put up the money, like he's like basically saying you got to own your own work. And right. I think a lot of us have had to come to learn the hard way on that stuff.
Yeah, a lot of us have had to come to learn the hard way. And, you get a contract from these companies and it's intimidating. It's a 10 to 20 page legal document, a contract that, I'm not qualified or educated to like be fluent in legal contract language. Thankfully, my partner, my wife, Tracy, she's a lawyer.
See, you need somebody. That's what I'm saying. Yoga teachers, we trained about meditation and
we trained to help people, to help people and to believe people, to see the best in people and to bring out their light. Like, let's make this, let's make this better. We want to make things better. We're not looking for conflict. We're not looking for, what are these sticking points. We're looking for agreement and excitement and purpose and positivity. Yeah. So thankfully I've had Tracy in my corner for all of these years because she's saved me countless times, getting myself into a situation that really, would not have been in my best interests. As difficult as some of these breakups have been, right? The kind of dissolution of a relationship. It, to some degree, I was protected because we negotiated those contracts. And I saw like with Yogaglo in particular, some of my peers and folks that I kind of brought to the table, friends of mine in the yoga world that I said like, well, you guys should meet each other, right? Like this is a good thing. One of the things that we made sure to do, Tracy made sure to do for my contracts was that we're signing away the rights to the product, right? They're going to own the tape. They're going to own the video. They're going to own the intellectual property, but that's an ambiguous thing. Like, do they own the instructions that I gave for Down Dog? Do they own Down Dog? Like what do they really own, right? They own the tape. But that, Tracy made sure that to get into writing, that if and when I was no longer going to renew my contract or they were not going to renew it with me, they could no longer post and offer the content that
so if you weren't on their platform, they could no longer use your stuff.
Right. Yeah.
Smart.
Yeah. So when I was no longer, when we broke up overnight, all my content went away. It all just disappeared, which was traumatic and painful and sad. Like it for me represented like close to at that time, like 400 classes over years. It was, an archive of me. And that went away overnight. And I got countless emails and messages from folks who were confused and bewildered and heartbroken by this. But that, they learned from me, in the corporate mind, like it's not in their best interest to have to do that. And so they no longer like negotiated that clause in their contracts, I think, because other folks, friends of mine that had their breakup with the company, their stuff is still there. Like,
I remember down. When the whole like Keno McGregor and Allo thing happened, where they sold the company and then somebody else owns all your classes.
Yeah. Which is what lawyers think about, right? Which not necessarily what yoga teachers think about.
No.
Like, well, what happens? What happens if this company gets bought by another company? What happens to those contracts going forward? Much less what happens to the content that you were under contract with to create for that company. That's what happened with Yoga International. Yoga International was bought by another company and, underwent a very big and, from my knowledge, kind of traumatic restructuring of the corporate leadership at Yoga International. Shed lots of people and ended lots of contracts with teachers, among them me, as another company absorbed Yoga International and transmuted it into whatever it is.
I know. What you can see that in the way, like, Yoga Journal started out as like Judith Hanson Lassiter in her living room, whatever, with the California Yoga Teachers Association. And then it gets bought out by AIM Multimedia Corp. It becomes a big thing. But you see now, totally different scene. But I guess what's interesting to me about that period of when yoga was first becoming on video and then going online, and there was kind of like as you say, yoga teachers weren't savvy online marketers or lawyers. So it was a little bit of a clunky transition, I think, there.
Yeah.
And then I guess that really did, I think that actually fueled the early internet, which was a different time. I spoke about that with Tara Stiles was on the show just recently, and we spoke about that, how there was a more innocent time on the internet, it seemed to me.
Yeah.
And the traveling that we were doing in 2017 to 2020 was really fueled by that. Like, people had seen something online and then were going to those in-person events, I think.
Yeah. And the stuff online was a subsidy for folks that was in addition to their in-person yoga, right? They went to classes at their local studio, and that they would get introduced to and interested in attending workshops or events or so on when those things occurred in their region. But that it didn't replace the in-person yoga. It complemented that, kind of subsidized that.
Yeah, that's right. It did seem to be. And then when I say the yoga world, that's kind of what I'm referring to, that there was an ecosystem of local centers with teacher trainings. There was an earlier internet where I really was connecting with people. I was writing my blog and having people email me and getting all kinds of invitations, as I was saying, from people all over the place being like, hey, come to my center. I read your blog.
Yeah.
And that whole ecosystem made you feel like you could have a career as a yoga teacher. And you could. We did.
Yeah, you could. And we did. And there was, there was a lot of engagement, a lot of participation. It was a lot of tiers of engagement, as you pointed out, from folks just coming to classes to workshops, to teacher trainings, to online, to guest teacher events. It was a dynamic, kind of multi-tiered ecosystem of community.
It's true. I do think, though, since you just mentioned in that list of teacher training, I feel like something should be mentioned there, because I do feel like teacher training was a little like bit of a canary in a coal mine or something, in terms of things were going to have to shift, because I just remember feeling at odds. It's why when I let go of my center, I swore off doing teacher training for like some time until recently, because it became such a money driver for centers. There was a certain sacrifice around like the pedagogy.
For sure.
That we learned. You see, we were teaching people to be teachers in ways that we didn't get trained like that. We just went to class for a year every day. And then the teacher said, okay, I got to go out of town. You're going to cover for me. And then you were ready because you had been there every day for a year or whatever.
Right.
It was a more iterative process.
Right. Yeah. More of a I don't know, mentorship might not be really the right word, but more of a student-teacher relationship over long periods of time that then to some degree qualified the student to start to become a teacher.
And it was self-motivated. It wasn't like I paid, now give me 200 hours. It was like I had a deep impulse to be here and study with you.
Yeah.
And that did shift. See, that shifted.
That did shift.
And I just remember like when I was traveling, and maybe you would see this, okay? Because I only did it for a few years. I don't know how many years you were really like out there traveling hard like I was, but you would go to a place the first time and you'd have like, you know, a big huzzah. You'd get your big numbers because nobody had met you there. That you'd have maybe some of your people who knew you from online, and then they'd have their people. And then you'd go again the next year and it would be less. You'd still get a decent number, but it'd be less. And then the disparity of how many people they were bringing, like from their email list, and how many people were coming from your email list would shift, and start to wonder. And then that third year, if you had a third year, you usually see a really big slump. And it wasn't a sustainable thing. You know what I'm saying? What I'm getting at is like what we were doing wasn't that sustainable, I don't think.
Yeah, I think in many ways it wasn't. And certainly in the teacher training kind of cycle, and that became the way that so many studios kept their doors open. Like it wasn't, you know, that was the way they did it, which becomes a vicious cycle that, you know, I think generally the quality of everything kind of goes down.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of Jay Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.